Week 11 kicks off tonight, and today I'm breaking down all of the must-start, must-sit, kind of pertinent information for those of you guys that need to set your fantasy football lineups heading in to Week 11. We're going to go through every single game, talk about matchups, talk about over-unders, spreads, where the sharps are betting. Everything you guys should need to know to set your lineups to the best of your abilities should be covered in today's video. So, without further ado, let's get things kicked off with Thursday Night Football. We got a nice game tonight. Washington Commanders at Philadelphia Eagles. I'll give my TNF underdog picks at the end of the video. The Philadelphia Eagles favored by 3.5 points at home against the Commanders, implied for 26 themselves. The over-under of this game is the second highest on the entire slate of 48.5 points. The over actually catching quite a bit of the steam. And as I talked about last week, that over plus 14%, all that means is that the total number of public bets are a certain way, usually on the over, because that's how the public likes to bet. But 14% of the sharp money is actually on the over, and that is the most among any game on this entire slate. So the sharps expecting a high-scoring game here. Both offenses have top 8 matchups in terms of their DVOA on offense versus the Eagles and Commanders' respective DVOA on defense. The key matchups to pay attention to tonight, Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin versus the Philadelphia secondary is going to be a bit of a tougher matchup. They're a top 5 defense against both the fantasy quarterback and fantasy wide receiver position. However, Terry McLaurin does have a great history of performing against the Eagles. He's been, almost 15 half PPR points on average over the last 2 years, and that's without, a great quarterback now in Jaden Daniels. Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia wide receivers, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, of course, all those guys are in your lineup versus the Washington secondary. They used to be like a very, very good matchup. Now they're about just above average of a matchup for the secondary of the Commanders there. Both running backs, Saquon Barkley and Brian Robinson Jr., have bottom 10 matchups, but you're still probably firing up both of them. B-Rob is expected to play in full. He practiced in full yesterday. No worries there from an injury standpoint. Dallas Goedert has the 16th easiest matchup on the slate for the tight end position. Definitely a viable streamer. Zach Ertz, probably not so much. The hardest matchup on the slate for the tight end position. And if you're looking for kickers, Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles, and then Zane Gonzalez filling in for Austin Seibert of the Commanders. Definitely, because of the high-scoring game environment, you're going to want those kickers out there. So, moving into the 1 p.m. slate, I believe we are done with international games, and we have 3 games at 4 p.m. and I think 8 games at 1 p.m. We do have 4 teams on bye this week, so we're going to have 28 total teams in action, 14 total games that we're going through here. The Packers at Bears. The Packers are 6.5-point road favorites, so again, Vegas expecting this game to go a certain way. The Bears not really in the greatest spot here. They just fired their offensive coordinator. It's a pretty tough matchup. Over-under is only 40.5, which is the second lowest of any game on this entire slate. The under actually catching a little bit of the steam as well, even though the pace of play is solid and the Green Bay offensive DVOA is pretty solid. Doesn't appear we're going to get a lot of fireworks in this game, probably a lot of ball control by the Packers, tempo. The Bears actually only allow 6 passing touchdowns on the season to the quarterback position, so I know it would feel tempting to start Jordan Love in this spot, but it's actually the single hardest matchup of any fantasy quarterback on the entire slate, and Caleb Williams, you just can't start him until further notice. Both running backs have about league average matchups. Like I said, I think this game will be ball control. Josh Jacobs getting a lot of carries, DeAndre Swift getting a lot of carries. Probably not a whole lot of fireworks from the wide receiver cores, all of them bottom 10 matchups. Again, Jaden Reed at least in the slot, so he can avoid a little bit of that, but at the same time, you don't really feel great about starting Romeo Doubs or even any of the Bears wide receivers. I think if I could start one, I would definitely be okay starting DJ Moore. But Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen probably going to want to leave those guys on the bench. If you are looking for streaming tight ends, though, this is a good matchup for you. You got Tucker Kraft, 25th easiest matchup there, and then Cole Kmet, 29th easiest matchup. So if you're looking for a streaming tight end, I think both of these guys are really good options, and I will talk about streamers at the end of the video. Stream both Green Bay defense and kicker as well, because they are 6.5-point favorites. They should be in store for some pretty good matchups there, especially knowing that Caleb Williams has been, prone to taking a lot of sacks so far in his NFL career. The Jaguars at Lions, the next game we're going to talk about here, the biggest spread of any game on the slate. 13-point home favorites are the Detroit Lions against the Mac Jones-led Jacksonville Jaguars, who are floundering out of control and probably about to fire their head coach. Detroit is implied for 30 points, which is the highest of any team on the slate. Over-under is set at 47, which, of course, Detroit doing most of that damage based on the projection here. The under actually catching quite a bit of steam on this game. Detroit's DVOA on offense combined with Jacksonville's porous defense makes for the easiest offense versus defense matchup of the entire slate as well. Key matchups to pay attention to: here's an easy one. Start everybody on Detroit. If you want to start Goff, if you want to start St. Brown, if you want to start Jamison Williams, if you want to start Sam Laporta, if you want to start David Montgomery, if you want to start Jahmyr Gibbs, all of them should be in your lineup because there's going to be a lot of points scored for the Lions. Going to be a very easy matchup for them. As far as the Jacksonville side of things, you're not obviously going to start Mac Jones. I wouldn't imagine anybody's down that bad. But if you needed to start Travis Etienne, not a good matchup. If you needed to start Brian Thomas, it is a good matchup, but he has Mac Jones as his quarterback. And then if you needed to start Evan Ingram, not a good matchup for him. So again, if you need to throw Brian Thomas Jr. out there, I think it's a good enough matchup, a good game environment, a good game script for it. But Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Evan Ingram, I don't think they are must starts by any means if you have better options at those positions. So moving into the Raiders at Dolphins here, the Dolphins 7.5-point home favorites. A lot of big spreads on this slate, but we do have a couple exciting games that we'll get to in a second. Over-under is 44.5. The under catching the most amount of steam of any game on the entire slate there. So they are not expecting a lot of points, they being the Sharps. 44.5, I guess they think it is set too high of a line. The DVOA matchup's not great, but again, Tua Tagovailoa does impact some of those DVOA numbers because some of that was without Tua in the lineup. Tua versus the Las Vegas pass defense, he is the 25th easiest matchup. I think he is a viable streaming quarterback if you need one. Both running back cores have top 7 matchups, so definitely fire up your Devon Achane. This looks like a blow-up spot for him. And I do think Alexander Mattison, prior to the bye, had good usage. I mean, in week number, 9 against the Cincinnati Bengals, it wasn't a good showing. Didn't have a lot of great touches, but in the 4 games prior, he was over 18 opportunities in every single one of those games. So I actually don't think Madison's a terrible option. Against the Miami Dolphins, you can typically run against this team. Both wide receiver cores have bottom 12 matchups. So Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, again, they're probably in your lineup for the most part, but not great matchups, at least on the outside. Against the Raiders corners, the quarterback position has mainly been getting it done via the legs and via the tight end and running back checkdowns, and I think that's what we maybe see from Tua Tagovailoa in this game, but Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, of course, can break a long touchdown at any point, so you probably want to start them. Jacoby Myers, again, you maybe want to start him as a low-end flex, but that's probably it. If you're looking for a streaming tight end, Jonnu Smith is definitely a good one. Brock Bowers, of course, in your lineup no matter what, but he does have a tougher matchup. But Jonnu, 27th easiest matchup for the tight end position. Like I said, wide receivers not an easy matchup on the outside. Running backs and tight ends maybe the way that the Miami Dolphins get this thing done. Stream the Miami defense as well because Gardner Minshew is starting. He's prone to meltdown for sure. And the kicker, Jason Sanders, both of those are top 3 to 5 options for me on the week. Rams at Patriots, the next game we're going to talk about here, not a very exciting game either. Rams are 4.5-point road favorites against New England. Drake May probably had his worst game of his career so far last week against the Chicago Bears. Didn't really look all that sharp. The over-under is set at 43.5 points. The under catching a good chunk of the steam right now. The pace of play is solid. The Rams' offensive DVOA versus the Patriots' defensive DVOA is pretty solid. Key matchups to pay attention to, you got both quarterbacks in above average matchups. So if you needed a streaming quarterback and you were really down bad, I think Matthew Stafford's a half decent option. Drake May I probably wouldn't mess with. You're probably hoping for rushing yards if you do end up playing him. The Rams defense and their pass rush specifically has been really, really good as of late, so I probably would not fuck with Drake May this week. Definitely if you need a quarterback in this game, it should be Stafford. Kyron Williams versus the New England Patriots run defense. That is a very easy matchup for him. Looks to be a get-right spot after 2 kind of ho-hum games in a row. Ramondre Stevenson versus the Rams run defense. Not a terrible matchup, not a good matchup. Kind of just a league average one, but like I said, the pass rush of the Rams has really been coming on the last month or so. Puka Nacua is expected to see shadow coverage from Christian Gonzalez. Of course, Cooper Kupp plays in the slot primarily, so it could be a Cooper Kupp game, and we know Matthew Stafford and him have kind of like a mind meld in the red zone, so I like him maybe to score a touchdown or have some good yardage in this game. If you're looking for streaming tight end, I think Hunter Henry's not a bad option because the Rams have been a little stronger against wide receivers than they have been against tight ends, so maybe Hunter Henry has a lot of targets in this one. And then the Rams defense, if you guys are looking for a defense, I think Drake May could definitely take a couple sacks, maybe turn the ball over in this game. It's going to be a tough sledding matchup for the rookie quarterback. So Browns at Saints, kind of the Jameis Winston Bowl here, the Jameis Winston revenge game. Saints are 1-point home favorites against the Browns. Not a very exciting game environment on the surface, but I actually think we could see some points in this one. 44.5-point over-under. Under catching a little bit of the steam, but the pace of play is solid. The defensive and offensive DVOA is not so much. So an interesting game nonetheless. key matchups to pay attention to, both quarterbacks have average matchups. So Jameis Winston, Derek Carr, can't imagine any of you guys are down bad enough that you would have to start one of these quarterbacks, but in Superflex leagues, definitely viable options there. Nick Chubb versus the New Orleans run defense. That is the 28th easiest matchup for the fantasy running back position, so feel very, very confident that he is going to have a pretty good performance in this one. Then you have Alvin Kamara versus the Cleveland Browns run defense, a 7th hardest matchup there, so probably tough sledding for him. And then if you're looking for pass game options, unfortunately the Saints don't have any because they have MVS and Mason Tipton. I would not fuck with any of those dudes. Maybe you want to stream MVS if you're really down bad, if you're down terribly, but Cedric Tillman and David Njoku, probably the only pass catchers you want to be starting in managed leagues. Again, DFS, best ball kind of guys, maybe pop up onto the scene. Stream both defenses as well. I think definitely the Saints defense is in play against Jameis, and also the Browns defense against Derek Carr probably in play as well, given the potential turnover aspect of this game. And I also think Cleveland's kicker is in play as well. Colts at Jets, kind of an interesting game now that Anthony Richardson is going to start. The Jets somehow 4-point favorites after kind of just being a complete dumpster fire this year for the entirety of the season. I don't know if it's me, but I feel like the Jets have missed the spread every single game. I don't know if that's a factual stat or not, but it feels like whatever the spread is on the Jets, it's wrong. And 4-point home favorite seems a little rich for me for a bad team. Over under is 44 points, which is 9th highest on the slate. This is actually the fastest paced play game on the entire slate too, so maybe we see a little bit more point production. Maybe we see a lot of offensive plays in this one. Could be an interesting game environment nonetheless. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and Garrett Wilson all have good matchups. 24th easiest pass defense in the league are the Colts. Conversely, Anthony Richardson, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman Jr., Adonai Mitchell, whoever we end up getting there, we don't know for sure if Pittman is going to play or if he's not going to play. If he doesn't play, AD Mitchell obviously becomes as a decent option there, and Josh Downs season upgrade. They have the 12th hardest matchup there, so not a great matchup for the Indianapolis Colts pass offense there. The running back should get it done, though. Breece Hall against the Indianapolis run defense. That's the 20th easiest matchup. Jonathan Taylor versus the Jets, 22nd easiest matchup. And if you are looking for streaming tight ends, there are none in this game, but there are streaming defenses. I do think the Jets defense is a half-decent streamer against Richardson, because as we've seen from Anthony Richardson, he's prone to turn the ball over. He can make mistakes. He can fumble the ball. He can take sacks. Whatever we might see from Anthony Richardson, I do think the Jets could get after him and have a half-decent game on defense. Probably expecting this one to be a little bit sloppy. Like I said, the Jets are a sloppy offense. The Colts, somewhat a sloppy offense as well. The next game we're going to talk about, definitely a more exciting game. Battle, I believe, for first place in the AFC North. The Baltimore Ravens heading to Pittsburgh to face the Steelers. Ravens are actually 3-point road favorites, which is a little interesting given that the Steelers are at home and the teams are relatively evenly matched as far as their record is concerned. Baltimore is implied for 25.75 points. The over-under set all the way up at 48.5, which I'm not really sure if I'm buying. I think this game could be a slugfest AFC North showdown, but regardless, Vegas expecting a lot of points. The Sharps actually liking the over a little bit in this one as well. Key matchups to watch. Lamar Jackson might have his worst game of the season in this week because we saw Jaden Daniels have a really rough game against the Steelers last week. That was his worst game of his career so far. I could see Lamar Jackson have a very tamed, 18 points instead of his usual 40 that he seems to put out every single week. Lamar Jackson obviously having a monster year from a fantasy perspective, but maybe lower expectations for him in this game. Russell Wilson, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth, all very, very good options. The Ravens are giving it away to the wide receiver, quarterback, and tight end position. It is just such an easy way to beat this team is by throwing on them, and I think Russell Wilson will probably let it fly in this one. Pickens having a monster stretch since Wilson has taken over the starting job. Derrick Henry versus the Pittsburgh Steelers run defense. He is going to be the reason they win this game if they do win it. The 23rd ranked Pittsburgh run defense, I think Derrick Henry could do some damage. Rashad Bateman is expected to see shadow coverage from Joey Porter Jr., which is an interesting wrinkle, knowing that it's not going to be Zay Flowers. I guess based on alignment or whatever, however they move Zay Flowers around the formation, he might have a big game this week. We've seen Zay Flowers be kind of hit or miss. He's either getting 100 yards in the first half or he has 15 yards in the whole game. So I think we could see a big game out of Zay Flowers this week. Pittsburgh running backs, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, about a league average matchup. And if you guys are looking for a streaming tight end, I guess he's not really a streamer anymore, but Mark Andrews has a pretty good matchup. And like I said, Pat Freiermuth also a good streamer, given the matchup there as well. So Vikings at Titans, the next game we're going to talk about. The Vikings 6-point road favorites going to Tennessee. There's not a very interesting game, 39.5-point over-under. That's the lowest on the slate. Over catching a little bit of the steam. I think the Vikings can put up points, but I have serious questions about the Titans' ability to do so, because we've seen Brian Flores really light up a lot of good offenses, and Will Levis and the Titans are not a good offense. So a very good chance that the Vikings win this game handedly. Maybe they're, keeping it close, just like we saw from the Jags last week. The Vikings and Jags game should not have been that close. Maybe the Vikings are just a little bit of a paper tiger, and the Titans are playing a little bit better as of late. Will Levis looked pretty good last week against the Chargers. Calvin Ridley obviously had a big game. We'll have to wait and see what happens in this one. Sam Darnold, if you're looking for a streaming quarterback, definitely a viable option. And if you're looking for streaming defenses and kickers, I think the Minnesota Vikings for both definitely makes some sense. Justin Jefferson, Addison, and Hawkinson do have kind of difficult matchups for the wide receiver and tight end position. The Titans have been pretty good against wide receivers, especially now that maybe we get L'Jarius Sneed back. And if he does come back, he will be shadow covering Justin Jefferson. If he doesn't play, obviously that's a big upgrade all around. But just keep an eye on that, pay attention to that, because that will definitely factor in how high Sam Darnold ranks in my rankings, how much we want to buy into the Vikings kind of blowing the doors off of this team. Calvin Ridley does have a great matchup, even though the pressure will probably be an issue for Will Levis because they're going to light him up. They're going to blitz him like crazy. Calvin Ridley has been spectacular from a target standpoint since DeAndre Hopkins was traded, and he has the 26th easiest matchup against fantasy wide receivers after last week performing against the Chargers, who are a much better secondary than what the Minnesota Vikings have been putting out there this season. Both running backs, Aaron Jones and Tony Pollard, have bottom 10 matchups, so maybe not the greatest game environments for the running back position. The Atlanta Falcons at Denver Broncos. This is the first game of 3 4 p.m. games. This is probably the worst one, I would imagine, of the 3 that we have. The Broncos are 2.5-point home favorites. I actually really like the Broncos to win this game. Maybe I'm just coping as a Buccaneers fan, but I actually think the Falcons could drop this one too, given that Denver's playing pretty well. They just took Kansas City to the brink, and also they are at home, and that's a tough place to play in Mile High. Pace of play is tied with that Jets and Colts game for the fastest on the entire slate. So going to be interesting to see how many points we get in this one. Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton have, half decent matchups there versus the Atlanta secondary, 22nd easiest ranked defense for the pass. On the other side of things, Kirk Cousins, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, not the easiest matchup, particularly Drake London, because he will definitely see shadow coverage from Patrick Surtain, who has been really good all season long. So maybe more of a Cousins to Mooney and Pitts game, more so than a Drake London and Patrick Surtain kind of matchup there. You probably want to avoid that. As far as the running back position is concerned, this should be a pretty good matchup, I would say, for Bijan, because it's a tough matchup for Drake London on the outside, which means they'll probably throw to Bijan a little bit more. Audric Estime took over the backfield in Denver last week. More of a pass funnel defense. You don't really want to run against the Atlanta Falcons, so keep that in mind. But I do think he has a chance to be a viable, low-end RB3, high-end RB3 type of play. If you're looking for an option for Denver right off the waiver wire, you probably got Audric Estime this week, and I think you could actually play him in this matchup given that the Broncos are favored, and I think they actually could win this game. Kyle Pitts versus the Broncos secondary, a pretty easy matchup, or at least a league average matchup, knowing that London's going to be locked down. And then stream both kickers if you are looking for them as well. So the other 2 4 p.m. games, this one definitely really interesting. Seahawks at 49ers. 49ers 6.5-point favorites. 49.5 points is the over-under on this game. And the over is actually catching quite a bit of the steam there. Second most steam of any game on the entire slate. So this Seahawks-49ers game could be a lot of fireworks here. The 49ers DVOA matchup is 4th highest on the slate. I worry a little bit that the Seahawks won't be able to figure things out. I actually heard a wild stat on a podcast that the Seahawks have had the longest third down, long down and distance in the history of the NFL since 1980, which is insane because they're the type of offense that it's big plays or negative runs. That's their whole offense. It's a really hard combination when you consider the fact that if I told you, okay, the worst offense in the NFL for long down and distance and playing in third and longs, who do you think they would be? The Panthers or the Raiders or some bad offense like that? No, it's the Seahawks. And not only are they the worst this year, they're the worst in 40 years, which is crazy. So the Seahawks not in a really good spot running the football. Maybe we'll see Kenneth Walker get back on track against the 24th ranked San Francisco run defense. Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, all those guys definitely viable plays this week. Deebo, a top 12 play at wide receiver. Purdy, a top 6 play at quarterback. And then Jennings and Pearsall, more so like top 36-ish wide receivers. Geno Smith will or should get DK Metcalf back this week. JSN, of course, the big breakout game before the bye. Both of those guys are definitely in play, although it is a tougher matchup against the 49ers. And then Christian McCaffrey, we saw his debut against the Bucs last week. We know the Bucs are pretty good at stopping the run, so we might have a big breakout Christian McCaffrey game against the 19th ranked Seahawks run defense. And of course, you're starting George Kittle. The 49ers, both defense and kicker, are in play against the Seahawks. Like I said, I could see the Seahawks really struggle in this one against the 49ers pass rush. It's in Santa Clara. Not a great place to play there. So Kansas City at Buffalo, the other 4 p.m. game. This one, definitely a lot of fireworks potentially, at least in terms of what it means for the AFC. I'm not sure it's going to be a super high-scoring game, but the Buffalo Bills are 2.5-point favorites. Seems a bit like a trap line. I mean, everybody's picking the Bills because the Chiefs eventually have to lose a game. They're undefeated right now. They almost lost to the Broncos, but this almost kind of seems like the type of game where the Chiefs, anytime they're getting points on Vegas is when you actually want to take them, and you maybe just want to see them drop a trap game. I think the Broncos probably should have beaten them last week. Of course, we all know that they were a field goal away from that, but the Bills being 2.5 points favorites is a little bit interesting to me. Both offenses do have top 12 matchups in terms of their DVOA versus the opposing defense. The key matchups to pay attention to, both QBs have bottom 12 fantasy quarterback matchups. Of course, you're still going to start Josh Allen and probably Patrick Mahomes as well, but just keep in mind that this 46-point over-under might be a little high. I could see this being a little bit of a defensive slugfest, especially the way Kansas City has played this year. How many games have we seen Kansas City be an absolute shootouts? Like the game against the Bucs is really the only game where Patrick Mahomes really let it loose and really fired it down the field. For the most part, they've been running the ball with Kareem Hunt, playing good defense, so on and so forth. Isaiah Pacheco should be back maybe next week or the week after, but Kareem Hunt for now has a great matchup against the Buffalo Bills run defense. 30th ranked are they, so he should be in a really good spot. James Cook, conversely, not a good matchup. First ranked Kansas City run defense. He does have a bye in week 12 as well. And I do believe in week 13 and week 14, he doesn't have easy matchups also. So if you guys have not had your trade deadline yet, I would consider taking James Cook, maybe adding a piece like a Cedric Tillman or a Calvin Ridley, somebody who's had some good weeks. See if you can tier up to somebody a little bit better, like a Breece Hall or Devon Achane or a Bijan Robinson or somebody like that, because James Cook doesn't really have the greatest run out to close out the season. Both wide receiver cores, bottom 12 matchups, so we already know Keon Coleman's not going to play. Amari Cooper is listed as questionable as of now. Khalil Shakir has a decent matchup in the slot. I think he'll be the best Bills receiver. Dalton Kincaid also not practicing with the knee injury he left last week's game with. And then Xavier Worthy, unstartable at this point in time. DeAndre Hopkins, probably a viable top 36 wide receiver. And then, of course, if Kincaid plays, he does have a good matchup, but he might not play, and maybe Dawson Knox becomes a streamer at that point. And then Travis Kelce, not a great matchup for him, but I imagine they are going to funnel a lot of targets his way, just like we've seen the last couple of weeks. So moving into the Sunday Night Football slate here, you guys can see Bengals at Chargers. Very interesting Sunday night game. The Chargers, one of the wildest 6-3 teams that you'll see. They haven't really played anybody yet. The Bengals, their first real good team that they're playing here, other than the Pittsburgh Steelers, who they lost to back in week 3. But even then, they had Justin Fields. They weren't nearly as good as they are now. Over under of 47 points. The over catching a good amount of the steam. Both offenses have pretty good matchups against the opposing defenses because the Bengals are just such a great passing offense, and they might get T. Higgins back and Orlando Brown back for this game, two of their crucial offensive pieces. And then the Chargers actually have a good matchup just because the Bengals are so bad on defense. I think Justin Herbert's one of the premier streaming quarterbacks this week, probably the best option who's widely available in most people's leagues. Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, definitely viable plays this week against the Bengals as well. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, the league average matchup across the board. You're definitely going to be firing up those guys, assuming that Higgins ends up playing. Both running backs have bottom 10 matchups, so maybe not the greatest game environment for Chase Brown and for J.K. Dobbins. Could be a bit more of a pass funnel type of game, but both of those guys can catch passes, so maybe they're involved in that way. Sneaky start for sure on Quentin Johnson. I do think he's a viable play this this week given the matchup. And I also think if you're looking for streaming tight ends, Will Dissly is a great option. And if T. Higgins is out again, you could probably put Mike Gesicki out there one more time. And then if you're looking for kickers, Evan McPherson and Cameron Dicker are both inside my top 12 kickers for the week in this game. All right, final game of the slate, and then we'll get into some of the streamers here. Texans at Cowboys. Don't have to spend very much time on this one. I think everybody knows that the Cowboys are a dumpster fire. The Texans probably win this game handily. They're 7.5-point favorites. The over-under is only 42 points. Pace of play is pretty high, but Cooper Rush or Trey Lance, probably Cooper Rush, not going to put up a huge fight. If you're looking for players to start here, I mean, CJ Stroud's a great play. I love him to get back on track. Nico Collins should be back this week, which is huge for CJ Stroud and probably also affects Tank Dell a little bit too. But honestly, I think it's a wash. Tank Dell has gotten more targets since Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins have been out, but I think Collins makes this offense better. I think he makes this offense more pass-friendly, and that could help Tank Dell out. We saw last year those guys were yo-yoing weeks before Stephon Diggs was there, and I think we could see that yet again. Joe Mixon probably gets a lot more red zone opportunities, and this is a very easy matchup for him against the Cowboys, and probably he is slated to get a lot of carries in this one. So all of your Texans you want to have into your lineup, kind of minus, I guess, Dalton Schultz, unless you are just really looking for a down, a lower play at the tight end position. Jake Ferguson, Rico Dowdle, all of these guys have bottom 10 matchups as far as like fantasy production to that position. I don't think you have to play any of them. I mean, Ferguson, you might think, oh, he's an every week starter at tight end. It's like, well, when the Cowboys are throwing for like 50 yards a game, he is absolutely not an every week starter at tight end. The only every week starter on the Cowboys roster is CeeDee Lamb, and even him, he's suffering from this quarterback play right now, too. So Rico Dowdle, Jake Ferguson, definitely not must-starts by any means, but if you need them, I suppose they're fine. Dalton Schultz, same thing. If you are looking for a defense, the Texans' defense is a very good streaming option this week, and both kickers, Kaimi Fairbairn's my kicker 1 on the week, and then Brandon Aubrey inside my top 12 just because he's a great kicker. Those guys are all very good options there. So speaking of streamers, I'm going to break down my streaming quarterbacks, streaming tight ends, streaming kickers, and streaming defenses, and then I will go through and talk about my TNF slate for my pick'em there as well. So streaming quarterback options, the cream of the crop too for me are Brock Purdy and Justin Herbert. Very good game environments, very good matchups as well. If you're looking for a quarterback and you have Kyler on bye or whatever, go and get Brock Purdy if he's available. He's a lot more widely rostered, but he did just have a bye week recently, so maybe he's available in some leagues. Justin Herbert is more likely the guy to be available in your league, and I think he's the premier streaming option. Jared Goff, also a good option in a game where the Lions are implied for 30 points. You can't go wrong. And then Bo Nix against the Atlanta Falcons, also a good option. If you need some deeper names, I also think Russell Wilson is a good option against the Baltimore Ravens this week. So that should cover you guys on streaming quarterbacks. Streaming tight ends, I really like Tucker Kraft this week going up against the Bears. Like I said, tough matchup on the outside for the Packers receivers. I like Tucker Kraft to get there, maybe as a good option at tight end. Dallas Goedert tonight on Thursday Night Football, high-scoring game environment like him tonight. Cole Kmet, same thing I said with Kraft. Good game environment for the tight end position. 29th easiest defense are the Packers. And then Pat Freiermuth, just like I said for Russell Wilson and George Pickens, very easy to pass the ball against the Baltimore Ravens, and Freiermuth could be a big beneficiary of that. And then streaming defenses, streaming kickers. The kickers that I like, Buffalo Bills kicker Tyler Bass, good game environment for him against the Chiefs. I do think that game could be a lot more field goals than touchdowns, like I said, so Harrison Butker, also a very good option in that Bills-Chiefs game. Cameron Dicker and Evan McPherson, but I have Cameron Dicker listed here. That Bengals and Chargers game, I do think could be a very high-scoring one, maybe a lot of field goals in that one. Cameron Dicker should be widely available for you. And then Jason Sanders for the Dolphins, very good matchup for them going up against the Raiders. He has a good matchup from a kicking standpoint. They allow a lot of field goals. And then streaming defenses, these are my top 5 defenses on the week. So if you're looking for a streaming defense, this is the order I would go pick them up in. Lions against Mac Jones, I mean, they're 13-point favorites. Need I say anything less? Vikings against Will Levis. It's Will Levis. He can turn the ball over. Jets versus Richardson, kind of same thing. He's Anthony Richardson. He could turn the ball over. Texans versus Cooper Rush, pretty self-explanatory. And then 49ers versus Geno Smith. This one's a little bit less self-explanatory, but like I said, 49ers at home, favored by nearly a touchdown. I like their matchup against the Seahawks. They have not been able to run the ball. They've been in a lot of third and longs. I think the 49ers defense is also a top 10 scoring defense on the year. They've been able to get turnovers, score touchdowns, things of that nature. So those are my top 5 defenses. Those are some streaming kickers that I like. Let's pivot over to talk about some of the Thursday Night Football pick'ems that I'm looking at. Again, of course, this channel is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy, so if you guys do want to tail the pick'em that I got going tonight, we like Terry McLaurin to go higher than 62.5 receiving yards. Subsequently, I like Jaden Daniels to go higher than his passing yardage total. The reason for that, I know I said they didn't really have the greatest matchup, but the reason I like it is because it's a high-scoring game environment. It's a pass-funnel defense. They're a hard defense to run the football against, and I think Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin should be dialed in for a game that is really going to be crucial to deciding who wins this division. And McLaurin has also been very good against the Eagles the last 2 seasons. He averages like 15 half PPR points per game the last 2 years, despite never having a quarterback like Jaden Daniels like he has right now. And then I also like Dallas Goedert to go higher than his 30.5 point receiving yardage total. He has been higher than this total in every healthy game this year. He came into last week banged up. He's been banged up for a number of weeks, but he's off the injury report. He's ready to go. I like him to pick up the slack in case A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are locked up on the outside. So if you want to tail that, you guys know the drill. Hit the link down below in the pinned comment. Promo code FSE on Underdog Fantasy. You can sign up right using that link, and you get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You'll also get this Jalen Hurts free square that you can add into this entry. And if all of these hit, the free square obviously is a lock, but the other 3 entries hit, you can win up to 10x your original money. Definitely tail those entries if you guys want, pick 'em entries all the time. I'm doing them over on my TikTok. I do like 3-4 entries a week, so definitely check that out. That is linked down below in the description. And of course, when you sign up using promo code FSE on Underdog Fantasy, you make a deposit and you make a play on the site, you make a pick 'em entry or whatever. You also get access to both mine and Danny's weekly start set rankings, our matchup charts. Every piece of information that I use to make this video is in our weekly rankings manifesto. You can get that for free when you sign up on Underdog using the promo code FSE, make a deposit, and make a play. So if that interests you, all that'll be linked down below in the description and in the pinned comment, as will flockfantasy.com, which is where our rest of season rankings is, bonus content, all that good stuff there. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.